The lights are on bright, everybody. It is time to dance. Welcome to the show you live for. It is GINORMOUS. Now, once again, I would like to thank everybody for being a part of this live stream, being a part of this live broadcast as we continue to progress. This is episode number 3. It's kind of hard to believe that this is where we are right now, but hey, we're here and we're going to continue to plow forward with all the news in sports. And as I mentioned in the first ever episode, eventually there's going to be some things that don't have to do with sports necessarily that will be a part of this show, and we will have guests. So, only looking forward to seeing just how further this progresses. So, we're going to start off with our first topic of the day. It is Wednesday. It is June 11th, 2025. And on June 9th, we had what a lot of fans like to call the Monday Night Raw of the year. Now, I was going through the show, I was watching it live while it happened, and I can remember being invested in every single segment that happened on that show. But I would just like to have a few takeaways because you talk about the whole show, it can kind of sound like reading off a PowerPoint presentation for 45 minutes. So let's just stick to some things that really stood out to me and some questions that I have. First of all, I would just like to say that our truth segment, I know a lot of people may be slightly upset that R-Truth isn't necessarily going to be the character that he was. Not going to be that silly guy anymore. But the truth, no pun intended, is I think that he has earned the right to be able to be kind of the silly man that he is right now and that he is today, or be the serious man, my apologies. He was the silly man for a long time. He's super good at it, created a Hall of Fame caliber career off of it. But now I believe he has earned the right to be serious as Ron Killings and to see what he can do. Now he's in his 50s, so we'll see how long that lasts. We'll see how long he has a prime. Let's see if he has a full-time wrestling schedule and if that will kind of create some wear and tear on his body as he is in his 50s, like I said. But I'm willing to see where this goes. I'm willing to see what becomes of this. And not to kind of bring some stuff from, 2022 and compare it to now, but I think the major difference between a lot, not all, but a lot of new things from the later Vince McMahon era, from the Triple H era now, is that even if there are some things now in the Triple H era creatively that you're not necessarily sure of, something that is like, I'm not sure, nothing starts off as dead in the water. And I think that you can't really say the same about, not like, again, not everything, because Vince McMahon created the wrestling that we know and love today, but a lot of stuff when he debuted, that stuff was dead in the water. So necessarily it didn't give you a whole lot to believe in and a whole lot to trust in and like. So I'll just say that. That's my piece on there. But with the R-Truth thing, I've seen a lot of controversy, so to speak, on and debating online whether or not the R-Truth firing was real, if it was fake, if it was all kind of this part of this ploy to get the silly R-Truth to become the more serious Ron Killings, or if it was like legit, they brought him back and then this is the product of it. And my answer to that, who cares? Who cares? You know what I mean? We got what we wanted. We have R-Truth, Ron Killings, back in the WWE. And whether or not it's real, fake, however it came about, came to be, we chanted for what we wanted and we got it. So really what happens from here on out to me is kind of just gravy, because there have been so many wrestlers who have been released who we didn't want, who didn't, at least for a long time, come back, and some not come back at all. So you know what? I'm happy with what I got. Beggars can't be choosers. And look, we are the fans. We dedicate our time and our hours to this product and our money. But at the end of the day, if we're being honest with ourselves, we can only control but so much. You know what I'm saying? We do have to let the creative team do their job and do their work. And if we just label everything as terrible, if we label everything as bad, then guess what? You're just going to have a negative mindset going into every single show. And I don't think anybody wants that. Nobody truly wants that, or else they wouldn't be tuning in every single week. And, that's just my bit on wrestling fans, because I have a love-hate relationship with them. I don't really engage with them too often in any social media comments, but it's just, to me, I see a lot of things that are unnecessarily criticized within the product. So let's go into something that should not be criticized, which is further on in this Monday Night Raw. Something that I noticed was Roxanne Perez is a complete natural at this. This isn't something that just dawned on me this past Monday, but it only gets more and more evident as the weeks, months, and years go on. Gianna, my sister, said hello. I would like to say hello to her, and thank you for commenting and participating in GINORMOUS. And Roxanne Perez, to me, is just a natural at this. She's somebody who, only had about a month or so of main roster experience before truly signing with Monday Night Raw. She was in a short little tag team with Julia, and she made a name for herself, and she proved that she belongs in the spotlight, in the bright lights, and on Netflix and on national television. She is convincingly being put into this faction, which was, I don't want to say she's in the Judgment Day because she's not necessarily officially a member yet, but with Finn Balor, with JD McDonough, and going back and forth with Liv, Raquel, and Dominic. By the way, that Fatal 4-Way Queen and King of the Ring match, both of them were outstanding quality. Both of them were amazing, and it's really great to see where especially this women's roster has developed into, what it has developed into, and where it'll go in the future. I'm super excited about Evolution, seeing Liv Morgan and Brie Bella kind of have that spat where Brie Bella and them kind of traded jabs, and it eventually led to Liv Morgan hitting the Oblivion and attacking Brie Bella. Obviously, that's going to be a match that is on Evolution, and I'm really excited for it. Liv Morgan carried the women's division, if you ask me, in 2024, and she really deserves to have that one-on-one spotlight with a legend, with a Hall of Famer, and she deserves to win. If we're being completely honest, Brie Bella would gain nothing from that. I'm sorry, Nikki Bella would gain nothing from that victory. So it's really nice to see that Liv Morgan is getting this spotlight and is getting kind of that respect and that tip of the cap of, hey, thank you for all the hard work that you have done this past year in keeping this company afloat in the women's division amid a lot of injuries, amid some newer guys and newer gals coming in and kind of finding their footing. She really was that constant presence, and she deserves it. So going for next week's show, you're seeing a fatal 4-way for, again, the tournament of the King of the Ring, and the men's match has one vacant spot. And I've heard a lot of rumblings as to who it's going to be, and I've kind of read some things about fan theories, and they're saying it's probably going to be Ilya Dragunov. They're saying it might be Ron Killings. There are a couple other far-fetched ones out there, which I'm not sure it'll happen. I've seen a couple people say Mr. Iguana, that guy from AAA. I'm not so sure that will happen. But if you ask me, if you think it's going to be Ilya Dragunov, or maybe more of a surprise, then I'm all for that. Ilya Dragunov was somebody who was a former NXT champion just a few years back, had a good feud with Baron Corbin, a great set of matches with Carmelo Hayes, and he's somebody who really, is somebody, he takes his lumps, he gets a good beating, and he's able to come back. He's able to get that fan investment, and he's able to contribute positively to the crowd. They really connected with him in his first couple of months there in that match against Ricochet. And that's something that I think if he comes back, he can instantly find his footing, instantly make an impact, and compete for King of the Ring, where Gunther is the World Heavyweight Champion. Potentially, you could see Gunther versus Ilya Dragunov. For those who do not know, I just got a ding. I don't know who that was from, but hello. For those who don't know, Ilya Dragunov is actually the first person to make Gunther pin or submit. And to see that kind of run back into the main roster, I think would be really good and awesome. And I'm looking forward to see how that will go, and if he is even the surprise guy. And if it's Ron Killings, I think that would be really cool and interesting as well. So, I think the new talent in the WWE, especially on the women's side, has been stepping up so big. I would like to say that I think Shawn Michaels has done a fantastic job in NXT. The fan intrigue down in that third brand once Triple H left was kind of a concern amongst the fans. They didn't know if that magic would ever be able to be recaptured, so to speak. But I would argue rather than lightning striking twice and NXT becoming the mega popular brand that it was back in the mid teens or mid 2010s into the early 2020s, I would argue that instead of it's become the exact same thing as just as popular, it's become so good in its own separate way. Because in the mid teens and the mid 2000s or 2010s, NXT Black and Gold was off the charts great. And women's wrestling was always a factor, but I think in this era of NXT, women's wrestling has taken a complete step up. And I would like to say that, again, Shawn Michaels has done a fantastic job, and he deserves all the props in the world for that. And I'm really looking forward to seeing at Crown Jewel or at King of the Ring what ends up making of these women, and especially at Evolution, seeing that brand that they become and getting to showcase their talents. So moving on, we are going to go to the Boston Red Sox. Last night was a good 3-1 victory. Lucas Giolito really finally looked like he found his footing on the mound. I think that's the best I'd say he's looked since his return game from the Tommy John surgery. It was really good to see him and get him going. Obviously, we know the rotation could really use him, and if he's able to contribute at least half of what he did last night on an every game basis, then you know what? I think the rotation will be in a lot better shape, because as of right now, it's really been a kind of a one-man show in Crochet. He's been the ace. He's been great, but they're looking for that guy behind him to be a lot more consistent. I think Walker Buehler had a pretty good stretch, but last start for him, he was a little shaky. Brian Bayo was good last time, but he's been a little shaky as well. Giolito, you could say the same thing about. Tanner Houck has been a clear disappointment. Obviously, we were looking for him to really take that next step forward to after his All-Star season last year, but he has completely fallen off the rails. And when he was playing, put together historically bad starts and historically bad runs. So hopefully when he comes back from injury, that stuff is corrected and we get to see that version of Tanner Houck that we were hoping to see would take the next step. But I think the news that we all are looking to get into, we're all looking to talk and hear about, is that Lucas Giolito stinks. No, I'm just kidding. Is that Roman Anthony and Christian Campbell and Marcelo Meyer, the three big guys that have been called up from the Worcester Red Sox, the three prospects who the Red Sox were kind of labeling and branding them as the face of the franchise, the people who are going to come in, and when they're up here and when they learn, that's when we're going to hit the ground running. We have finally seen those three in a couple of games now be all together as one. So the future, for all intents and purposes, is here. The future is now, and we are going to see what this group is capable of. And I would just like to say, proceed with caution a little bit, especially in the early going when you're talking about these three young men and these young players, because we have to remember that these guys at the end of the day are still rookies. And these guys at the end of the day are people who still need to make that adjustment, have that adjustment period into the major leagues. And I do believe that that is going to take some time. So I understand that, all right, here they are. Now let's go. There are no excuses. We need to compete. But I think that we need to really kind of temper our expectations, especially in the beginning. And I'm not going to make this an official prediction, but I really do believe that this season, post All-Star break, you're going to see the team really go on a good streak. I'm not going to say this historically great hot streak. I'm not going to say they're going to make the playoffs and make a World Series push. But I think now that on paper, the best version of the Red Sox is now here and now in fruition, we're not going to get to see that true great form or good form until a lot of those guys find their footing, get some time, take their lumps, and they go through all this time, the stuff that they need to, and then they win. You know, I think that the Red Sox have a little bit of a ways to go. I think that truly when we can have our expectations high is after they make their offseason moves this coming offseason. I know that's something that may make a lot of people roll their eyes, roll their heads, shake their heads, and get frustrated. But unfortunately, I do think the reality is we're not going to see the best version of the Red Sox until next season because a lot of those guys are going to have that footing and that experience in the major leagues, which right now they just simply do not have. But a big point that I'd like to say about Roman Anthony is that it made me so happy during the broadcast on Nesson last night. They were showing that he was going neck and neck with Alex Bregman, standing right next to him in the dugout, talking with him, picking his brain. I think that this is absolutely the greatest thing that could happen for Roman Anthony. I mean, to go next to a multi-time Gold Glover, a multi-time World Series champion, an all-time respected veteran, that's somebody who I would want Roman Anthony to be next to kind of learn from, marinate from. And at the end of the day, look, I think that's what he really is there for, along with being able to kind of show off his talents in the major leagues, which is Alex Bregman, of course, kind of playing for that next contract. Because if we're being real, I'm not so sure Alex Bregman's going to be back next season, but I'm just really happy that he's there. Yep, Swervy Kirby, you're absolutely right. He found the right friend in the dugout, and I could not be more happy about it. I think that kind of interaction is going to be something that helps Roman Anthony so much moving forward, and that's really, kind of what I have to say. I'd like to see, I'm not saying it hasn't happened at all, I would really like to see more shots of kind of Christian Campbell, Marcelo Mayer, kind of picking the brain of Alex Bregman, because I really do think that all of those kids could have a lot to learn from him. Necessarily, I'm not saying, again, it hasn't happened at all, but I would like to see a lot more of that. Kind of Alex Bregman just going next to all three of those kids, kind of talking to him. Maybe will they sit down on the bench and he's kind of talking to him, giving him a pep talk. That's something that I'd love to see, me personally. But yeah, like I said, I don't think that we're going to see the best version of the Red Sox, unfortunately, until next season. And I had a little bit of an interesting take last night, and I know that I'm not going to say it didn't go over well, but it was kind of met with a little bit of confusion. I think that in the coming years, let's just say if Christian Campbell doesn't develop defensively, which again, way too early to predict whether or not he will or he won't, but I really do think that if you want to make the statement that Roman Anthony is that face of the franchise, because he was the number one prospect in baseball, and even though we were so excited for Campbell and Marcelo Mayer to come up, we were really hoping and we were all really waiting for Roman Anthony especially. I think that Christian Campbell does potentially have a future at DH. I think that he does have a really unique and special bat. It can get a little streaky at times, of course, and it's way too early to predict, but I wouldn't necessarily rule out trading Rafael Devers at some point to kind of make it clear that Roman Anthony is the face of your franchise, and you are moving forward with him on all the posters, on all the cups. Hello, Gianna.
Hello.
It's good to see you. Gianna's going upstairs. She kind of scared me coming around the corner. But that's something that I really think would be interesting and that I would like to see. So moving on to a subject that I really think is exciting, something that I am really happy to kind of talk to you guys about because it's something that, I think it's fun. It's getting to be that time of year and we're all starting to get that itch. I would like to talk to you guys a little bit of who I think will be good for your fantasy football teams this year. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm no expert. I'm no analyst. I'm no, guy who is going to go on the NFL Network and tell you the snap shares and this shares and that and give you all these advanced analytics. I'm just here to tell you who I think is going to be good. I'm here to tell you who I think is going to make an impact and what's going to end up happening. Whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong. Look, I've won championships and I've been in last place, so who am I to really say? But let's get into it because I think I have some valid input here. Number one, I think George Pickens is going to be a huge add for anybody who drafts him. And just to clarify, this is non-dynasty. This is just for a standard PPR league. This is not for dynasty. This is not what I think in the future is going to be great, just for this upcoming season. So I think George Pickens is going to be really good. Obviously, there's going to be so much defensive attention on CD Lamb. And George Pickens in Pittsburgh showed potential of being a number one wide receiver. He definitely has the talent. Whether or not he has, like the mindset to kind of stay in it and not get frustrated, to keep his head in the game, that remains to be seen. But let's just say if he is, which I don't think is that great of an if we're being honest, I think that George Pickens is going to be a massively productive player in that passing offense for the Cowboys with Dak Prescott, who will be returning, and a lot of attention going on to CD Lamb. So I think anybody who drafts George Pickens will be very happy with the production that he gets. I have him in my Dynasty League. I'm happy to see him thrive and flourish in this Cowboys offense, and looking forward to seeing what he can do. Next, we're going to go on to a rookie, and I think that Quinshon Judkins is going to make a lot of impact on the Cleveland Browns. A lot of people were kind of confused as to why the Cleveland Browns drafted him rather than Travion Henderson, because out of that Ohio State duo backfield, Henderson was kind of viewed as the better prospect, but we have to take the fit into account and fit into consideration. The thumper, the power back role is more of what Quinshon Judkins is, and looking at the history of it, they just had Nick Chubb. That is what they want. They're looking to get kind of that Nick Chubb role / production out of Quinshon Judkins, and I think that he's up for it. He's going to be sharing snaps with Jerome Ford, who's a good receiver. They also drafted Dylan Sampson as well, so we'll see if he goes into that number 2 role and kind of creates that thunder and lightning role, which a lot of the league is going towards, which the Detroit Lions really popularized in this modern game. But we will see. I think that Quinshon Judkins, at least for this season, is really going to take over that running back 1 role, handle it well, and run the offense really good and be very productive for that team, for a team that has a lot of questions at quarterback and is going to heavily rely on that running game. Next, I think that Davante Adams is going to have a very, very good season. And for a lot of the similarities with George Pickens, again, it's going to be a lot of he's going to be the number 2 guy. Puka Nacua now is the undisputed number 1 wide receiver in that room. And Davante Adams doesn't need to be that number 1, that savior. He just needs to be Davante Adams. And when he is at his game and when he does not have a bunch of pressure on him, Davante Adams is an all-time great wide receiver. He's playing for, I'll say it, an all-time great head coach with an all-time great offensive system, and I think it's going to be great. I think that that's going to be something that really comes to fruition, and I think that Davante Adams, as a wide receiver too for your fantasy teams, is going to be something that really pays off. Let's see what Swerve Kirby said. I love Judkins, but I wonder about the stability of the Browns as a whole. Stefanski's on the hot seat if a slow start. I understand what you're saying. I definitely do think that they have a lot of question marks. But if you ask me, I don't think that Kevin Stefanski really deserves to be on the hot seat. And I know that's not what you're saying. I know that's not the point you're making. But, with their quarterback things, I just think that with the lack of success that they've had with Deshaun Watson, and obviously kind of the project at quarterback that they're doing, whether it'll be Pickett, Flacco, Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders, we'll really see how it goes. But I think no matter who they pick, obviously they do not have an ultra-talented quarterback. They drafted Harold Fannin out of Bowling Green, so obviously they're going to go a lot of 2 tight end sets, which kind of leads you to believe if they're going to be in those 2 tight end sets, they're also going to rely on their running game heavily. And I think that that is the identity that the team has chosen to build. And I do believe that they're choosing and they drafted Quinshon Judkins to be the head of that system that they run. And look, anything at the end of the day could not work out. But I do think that Quinshon Judkins is going to find himself in a pretty successful role. And even if he's not like an Ashton Jeanty level rookie, which I believe we all know that Ashton Jeanty is going to be great. Even if he's not at that level, I still think that he's going to find himself getting obviously starting caliber carries, and he's going to find himself with a lot of red zone production. So I think that's going to lead well to Quinshon Judkins' success. So kind of to put a bow tie on the Davante Adams thing, I think that Davante Adams, once again, when he doesn't have all that defensive attention on him, it's going to go to Puka Nacua a lot of the time. I think that Devontae Adams, with kind of the chains off, is going to be awesome and get to showcase that Hall of Fame talent. Now, look, he is 33 years old. I understand he's a little bit older. And yes, the one caveat to this is Puka Nacua does need to stay healthy. He absolutely does need to showcase that he has that durability throughout a 17-game season. But I'm predicting that this is the year that will happen. So, again, the benefit of hindsight will always be 2020. We can always go back to this. And, hey, if Puka Nacua doesn't end up staying healthy, then hey, I mean, it should have been on me. I kind of should have used the history for that. But I do believe that this is going to be what will happen. So moving on to my 4th out of 5 people who I think are going to be really good this season for your fantasy teams. I think that Zach Charbonnet is going to find himself in a really good role with the Seattle Seahawks. We saw as last season came along, he kind of took a lot more snaps and he looked a little bit more impressive. I think that they have gone so good with this Kenneth Walker and this Zach Charbonnet duo. But if we're being honest with ourselves, they being Seattle Seahawks, they invested a high draft pick in Kenneth Walker. And while he's been good when he's on the field, I would argue that he hasn't taken that next step. And whether it be due to injuries, whether it be due to just not being very productive, or maybe the offensive line not being great, whatever factors kind of go into Kenneth Walker not taking that next step that I believe that Seattle hoped that he would, I think that it resulted in Zach Charbonnet getting a lot more carries, a lot more burn, and I think that he's going to come to fruition this year as a starting running back and get a lot of points for your fantasy team, which again, in Seattle, really loves to use and utilize that running game, which will be very impressive for them. Oh, the Bruins only won the 2011 Stanley Cup because Rondo dislocated his elbow that year. Tim Thomas saw 1.7 seconds into the future after that. I would just like to say, very insightful from Gianna. I mean, that's not something that I ever thought that I would cover. I thought it would be a little bit too controversial on this show. But I would just like to say, fantastic point, fantastic insight. I could not be more proud of the sports knowledge of my sister. So yeah, Zach Charbonnet is somebody who I thought, and Robert is not very happy, and he is saying Gianna. So yeah, Zach Charbonnet, I've said my piece on him. I'd like to give a sleeper, and this is kind of how we're going to close out Ginormous today. A sleeper who I think is going to be very good. He is a rookie out of LSU. My buddy John Bro loves him, knows him well. His name is Mason Taylor, tight end for the New York Jets. Now, if you look at what the New York Jets have done, they hired Aaron Glenn, and they got the Lions pass game coordinator to be their OC this year. And obviously we all know that he wasn't calling the plays, but the passing game coordinator plays a huge role in forming the offense as well. So clearly he used the tight end as a huge priority. They used a second-round pick on Mason Taylor this year, so they are planning to use him. I think that he is a very smooth route runner. I think that even though Justin Fields isn't somebody historically who favored the tight ends throughout a season, I think that they're going to find it within the offense to become a tight end offense. Yes, they have Breece Hall, who's a really good running back, Garrett Wilson, who's a great receiver, but I would argue that Garrett Wilson especially has a lot more to prove before he becomes kind of that proven number one commodity, that proven number one receiver that you throw to. And I think that that's going to lend very greatly to Mason Taylor's talents. This is the last thing I'll say. If Terry Rozier had been given Kyrie Irving's shoes in 2018, the Celtics would have won the finals and ended climate change. I don't know if you guys can hear my sister laughing in the background. That is her. That is the one making these foolish comments. But I think that they're funny, and I would like to thank her for her contributions to the show. So kind of a silly way to end it, but kind of to put a bow tie on this topic here. The fantasy players who I believe were going to make a big impact this season: George Pickens, Quinshon Judkins, Devontae Adams, Zach Charbonnet, and my sleeper pick will be Mason Taylor. So, guys, that's what I have to say. We all covered a lot of Monday Night Raw at the beginning of the show. The middle of it talked about the Boston Red Sox and the 3 prospects that were called up, and now we ended that kind of a bow tie with the fantasy football players. I would like to thank everybody who was in the chat, everyone who had participated in the group and the conversation and discussion. Really kind of helped things move along. A lot of you bring up a lot of interesting points, especially you, Gianna. Guys, thank you for